My name is Louise Miller, though most know me as Grandma Lou. At 73, I carry a story that has lived in my heart for over 60 years. A story of unimaginable pain, but ultimately of survival and hope. I was born in 1952 in Riverdale, a small suburb of Philadelphia. We were a simple family living in a modest three-bedroom house. My father, George, worked as a truck driver, often gone for days or weeks at a time. My mother, Connie, was a seamstress who took in clothes from wealthy ladies to wash and iron. I was the fourth child and only daughter, following three brothers, Anthony, 19, Joseph, 17, and Robert, 15. My father called me his little princess. When he was home, I felt completely protected. But in March 1965, when I was just 13, everything changed during one of his long absences. It started one afternoon while I washed dishes. Anthony approached me differently than ever before. Joseph appeared, then Robert. I realized with horror they had planned something together. What happened in that kitchen is something that still haunts me. My own brothers, who should have protected me, became my tormentors. "If you tell anyone, nobody will believe you," Robert warned afterward. "They'll say you're a liar." The abuse became a terrible pattern. They knew my mother's schedule perfectly: Tuesdays and Thursdays when she delivered clothes, Saturdays at the market. Every absence was an opportunity for them to continue their horrific acts. I changed from a cheerful, talkative girl into a shadow. I stopped eating properly. My grades plummeted, and dark circles appeared under my eyes. I tried everything to become invisible. Baggy clothes, short hair, no smiling. Nothing worked. They manipulated everyone around me, even spreading rumors that I was flirty with older boys, poisoning my relationship with my mother. She began watching me with suspicion, but not in the way I desperately needed. Months of abuse took a devastating toll on my body. I began bleeding outside normal periods, experiencing fainting spells and unexplained fevers. One night, after particularly violent abuse, I started hemorrhaging severely. I passed out on the bathroom floor in pools of blood. My brothers panicked. "If anyone finds out, we're done for," Anthony said as they cleaned up and moved me to bed. By miraculous timing, my father returned early from his trip that night. When he came to give me his usual goodnight kiss, he found me barely conscious in blood-soaked sheets. "My God, what happened here?" he cried out, his voice filled with terror. At St. Helena Hospital, doctors worked frantically to save my life. Their diagnosis echoed through the emergency room. "This girl has been a victim of continued and violent sexual abuse." My father, always so calm, erupted. It took 3 nurses to restrain him. "Who did this to my daughter?" he screamed with heartbreaking desperation. When a social worker asked who hurt me, I looked at my destroyed father and devastated mother. How could I tell them the truth? "It was a group of guys on the way back from school," I whispered, protecting those who deserved no protection. I spent a week in the hospital, requiring emergency surgery. The damage was so severe that doctors warned I might never have children. 3 months after the hospital, my father's suspicions grew stronger. My brother's strange behavior hadn't escaped his notice. One Tuesday in June 1966, he returned from the hospital with copies of my medical records. He confronted Anthony in the living room, documents in hand. These injuries were consistent with repeated abuse over a long period. It wasn't a single attack. I had been trying to tell Anthony to leave me alone when my father overheard, "You're going to keep that mouth shut." "What does she need to keep secret?" my father demanded. With my father's encouragement and all the courage I could gather, I finally spoke the truth. "It was them, Dad. It was my brothers." The revelation destroyed something in my father forever. When Joseph and my mother entered, I confirmed it again. All 3 of them, since March, every time Mom left. What followed was chaos. My father attacked Anthony with years of contained rage. Neighbors called the police. When officers arrived, I told them everything, every detail, every abuse, every threat. Anthony and Joseph were arrested immediately. Robert, who had been hiding, came forward and confessed. I was part of it. I deserve to be arrested too. You are no longer my son, my father told them simply. None of you are. Our family became the town's main topic. My father was never the same. The gentle, smiling man disappeared, replaced by someone broken by guilt. I should have noticed, he repeated endlessly. My mother fell into deep depression, her hair turning completely white within months. At school, I became a spectacle. Whispers followed me everywhere. In August 1966, we left Riverdale for New Hope, 250 miles away, seeking a fresh start where nobody knew our story. But I learned painfully that no matter how far you run, trauma travels with you. The nightmares continued. I built walls around myself at my new Catholic school, unable to trust anyone. 6 months after moving, Robert's first letter arrived from the reformatory. I carried it for weeks before reading his apology and admission of guilt. I never responded, but kept the letter as acknowledgement that what happened was real. In 1971, I was accepted to the College of Education in Philadelphia. Despite my fears, I was determined not to let trauma prevent me from living. In my second year, I met John, an engineering student. He was different, patient, respectful, never crossing boundaries. When I flinched away during our first movie date, he simply said, "I won't do anything you don't want." Those words were revolutionary to me. Our relationship progressed slowly. In 1974, when Anthony and Joseph were released early, fear returned with force. I made the difficult decision to tell John everything. He listened, held my hands, and when I finished, said simply, "You're the strongest person I've ever met. I love you. Nothing changes that." With John's support, I wrote letters to all 3 brothers, not seeking reconciliation, but declaring my independence from fear. To Robert, I expressed that while I couldn't fully forgive, I wished him peace. To Joseph, I stated I wouldn't live in fear anymore. To Anthony, I wrote, "You have no more power over me." In December 1974, I graduated. John proposed 2 weeks later. We married in March 1975, beginning a life built on patience, respect, and genuine love. In 1976, despite doctors' warnings, I became pregnant. When Mary was born in January 1977, holding her was miraculous. "I'll protect you always," I promised. Being a mother healed me in unexpected ways. Peter followed in 1980, and then Anna in 1983. Through my children, I learned I could protect, nurture, and love completely. In 1985, Robert wrote again, sharing how my earlier letter had changed his life. He had rebuilt himself, worked with abuse victims, and found someone who accepted his past. I responded briefly, acknowledging his path to redemption without resuming contact. Years passed. Anthony died in 1990. Joseph disappeared to the West Coast. My father passed peacefully in 1992, followed by my mother in 1994. John and I grew old together, watching our children flourish and give us grandchildren. In 2010, at 58, I made a surprising decision. I met Robert at a Philadelphia cafe to definitively close that chapter. He was unrecognizable, gray-haired, wearing reading glasses. We talked about our lives without reconciling. When he asked if I'd been happy despite everything, I thought of John, our children and grandchildren. "Yes," I answered honestly, "very happy." That was my greatest victory. Not allowing months of horror to define my entire existence, but choosing life, love, and happiness despite the scars. Today, at 73, I'm a grandmother of 7, a retired teacher who helped hundreds of children, and a woman who learned that even the deepest wounds can heal with time and care. If you're facing your own valley of shadows, remember you are stronger than you imagine. Healing may be slow and difficult, but it is possible.
The darkness doesn't get the final word, you do. From my heart to yours, there is always hope. There is always a path beyond the pain. With love and courage, Grandma Lou.
Speaking in a voice that sent chills down my spine. "Louise, you're becoming a young lady, you know," he said, grabbing my arm when I tried to move away. Joseph appeared, then Robert. The smile on Joseph's face told me everything. They had planned something together. What happened in that kitchen that afternoon is something that still haunts me. My own brothers, who should have protected me, became my tormentors. They treated me not as their sister, but as something less than human. "If you tell anyone, nobody will believe you," Robert warned afterward. "They'll say you're a liar, that you wanted it." I stayed on the kitchen floor for nearly an hour after they left, unable to move, unable to stop crying. When I finally dragged myself to the bathroom, I scrubbed my skin until it was raw and red, as if I could wash away what had happened. When my mother came home, pretending everything was fine became the hardest performance of my young life. That night, I locked my bedroom door and pushed my dresser against it, but it provided no real protection. The next morning, Anthony kicked the door in with a single push. "No use locking yourself in, silly. This house is ours too." The abuse became a terrible pattern, a nightmare that repeated with calculated precision. They knew my mother's schedule better than she did. Tuesdays and Thursdays when she delivered clothes and chatted with neighbors. Saturdays when she spent at least 2 hours at the market. Every absence became an opportunity for them to continue their horrific acts. They took turns watching for anyone who might come home early, while the others violated me repeatedly. I changed from a cheerful, talkative girl into a shadow of myself. I stopped eating properly, lost weight rapidly, and permanent dark circles appeared under my eyes. At school, my grades plummeted from excellent to failing. My teacher, Miss Henderson, noticed immediately. "What's happening to you, Louise?" she asked one day after class. "You've always been so diligent, such a bright student." I wanted desperately to tell her the truth at that moment. The words formed in my throat, but Robert's warning echoed in my mind. I convinced myself that nobody would believe me anyway. Worse, I began to torture myself with questions. Had I done something to provoke this? Was it somehow my fault? I tried everything to become invisible. Baggy, shapeless clothes that hid my developing body, cutting my hair short like a boy's, never smiling, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Nothing worked. The abuse only intensified. Their manipulation extended beyond the physical violations. They systematically poisoned my relationship with my mother, telling her they'd seen me talking to older boys on street corners. "Louise is getting flirty, Mom," Anthony would say at dinner with false concern. My mother began watching me with suspicion rather than protection, wondering if I was becoming a problem child, rather than seeing I was a child with a terrible problem. The only thing that gave me strength was the thought of my father's return. When he was home, they wouldn't dare approach me. But how could I tell him? How could I make him believe his own sons were capable of such evil? As months passed, my body began showing signs it couldn't endure much more. I started bleeding outside normal periods, experiencing fainting spells and unexplained fevers that came and went like cruel tides. One night in late 1965, after particularly violent abuse by all 3 brothers, I started hemorrhaging severely. The pain was so intense I passed out in the bathroom, waking on the floor surrounded by pools of my own blood, without even the strength to call for help. Robert found me first. I saw genuine panic flash across his face for the first time. "Joseph! Anthony, come here!" he shouted with unmistakable fear. I think this time we went too far. They carried me to bed, frantically cleaned the bathroom, changed my clothes. Their panic wasn't for my well-being. It was pure self-preservation. "If anyone finds out, we're done for," Anthony hissed. "We'll say she fell down the back stairs." They left me in my room, still bleeding but less severely. The pain was unbearable, but I didn't even have the strength to cry anymore. I just prayed, begging God to either save me or take me away from this hell in any way possible. By miraculous timing, my father returned early from his trip that night. He wasn't supposed to arrive until the next day, but he'd finished his deliveries ahead of schedule. I remember him entering my dark room to give me his usual goodnight kiss, a ritual he never missed when returning from the road. "Luis, daughter, wake up," he called gently, shaking my shoulder. His hand touched the sheet, coming away wet with blood. My God, what happened here? Connie, come here right now. I opened my eyes with difficulty and saw my father, my hero, with his eyes full of tears and terror. I tried to smile, tried to tell him I was happy he was back, but could only whisper, "Dad, help me," before passing out again. At St. Helena Hospital, doctors worked frantically to save my life. My blood pressure was dangerously low. I'd lost far too much blood. Their voices seemed to come from very far away, saying things I couldn't quite understand. But one phrase etched itself into my memory forever. "This girl has been a victim of continued and violent sexual abuse. We need to call the police immediately." The emergency room erupted. My father, always so calm and gentle, began screaming and breaking things. It took 3 nurses to restrain him. I had never seen my father like that. This primal rage mixed with devastating heartbreak. "Who did this to my daughter? Who? Who?" he screamed with such desperation, it shattered something inside me even further. My mother cried in a corner, rocking back and forth, like a frightened child in shock, seeming unable to process what was happening to our family. When a young social worker named Margaret asked who hurt me, I looked at my destroyed father leaning against the wall and my mother who seemed to have aged 10 years in one night. How could I tell them the truth? How could I completely destroy what remained of our family? "It was a group of guys on the way back from school," I whispered, the lie coming out almost automatically. "I don't know them. They were from out of town." It was my first lie to protect those who deserved no protection, lies that would corrode me from the inside like acid for months to come. I spent a week in the hospital requiring emergency surgery. The internal trauma was so severe that doctors warned I might not be able to have children at just 13 years old. During that week, my brothers never visited once. My father and mother took turns at my bedside day and night, my father holding my hand while I slept, always there with deep, dark circles and an unshaven beard when I woke. "I'll find who did this, princess," he promised with fierce determination, "even if I have to turn this whole town upside down." Police came several times with questions I answered vaguely. I couldn't describe the attackers, didn't know where they were from, wasn't sure of anything. The officers exchanged suspicious looks. They knew I was hiding something, but couldn't break through my wall of fear and misplaced loyalty. 3 months after the hospital, tension in our home was suffocating. My father's suspicions grew stronger daily. My brother's strange behavior, Anthony's false kindness, Joseph's avoidance, Robert's visible deterioration hadn't escaped his notice. One night, I heard my parents arguing violently in their bedroom, my father's voice raised in a way I'd never heard before. "There's something wrong with this whole story, Connie. Can't you see? These boys are acting very strangely." "What are you insinuating, George?" My mother responded, her voice trembling. "For God's sakes, they're your sons." "And she is my daughter, too. Look at her, Connie. Look at what they did to our girl. She doesn't sleep, doesn't eat, doesn't smile anymore. Those eyes are no longer those of a child." My father's protective instinct was sniffing out the truth behind my lies. The storm was approaching, and when it arrived, it would sweep everything away. It was a Tuesday in June 1966, almost 4 months after my hospital stay, when everything finally exploded.
My father returned from the hospital with copies of my medical records, papers he'd requested to send to a specialist in Philadelphia. He confronted Anthony in our living room, documents in hand. "I just got back from the hospital," he said in a controlled but terrible voice. "Do you know what it says here, Anthony? The doctor documented your sister's injuries in detail. These injuries were consistent with repeated abuse over a long period. It wasn't a single attack, as Louise said. It was months. I've been trying to tell Anthony to leave me alone, to never touch me again, when my father overheard the end of our conversation. You're going to keep that mouth shut. What does she need to keep secret, Anthony? What?" With my father's encouragement and all the courage I could gather from some deep well I didn't know existed, I finally spoke the truth that had been poisoning me for months. "It was them, Dad. It was my brothers." My father closed his eyes as if receiving a physical blow. When he opened them again, I saw that something fundamental had changed in him forever. "How long?" he asked, his voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "Since March, when you made that long trip to Ohio." 3 months, he murmured, doing the terrible mathematics. "My God, 3 months!" When Joseph and my mother entered, I confirmed it again with a strength I didn't know I possessed. All 3 of them, since March, every time Mom left. What followed was an explosion in slow motion. My father attacked Anthony with years of contained rage and months of impotent frustration erupting all at once. Neighbors called the police. When officers arrived at our chaotic home, I told them everything, every detail, every abuse, every threat. It was as if a dam had broken inside me and the truth flowed out uncontrollably. Anthony and Joseph were arrested immediately, handcuffed and taken away. Robert, who had been hiding, came forward and confessed. I was part of it too. I deserved to be arrested too. My father, being attended to by a paramedic, looked at Robert with a mixture of contempt and pity. "You're no longer my son," he said simply. "None of you are." The trial was swift by the standards of the time. Medical evidence, my testimony, and Robert's confession left no room for doubt. Anthony and Joseph received 12-year sentences each. Robert, being a minor who confessed spontaneously, got a lighter sentence of 6 years in juvenile detention. Our family became the town's main topic of gossip and speculation. Local newspapers ran sensationalist headlines. "Abusive brothers arrested in Riverdale. Father discovers family horror and turns violent. Family destroyed by terrible secret." My father was never the same again. The gentle, smiling man I knew disappeared that June afternoon, replaced by someone hollow and broken by guilt and rage. He couldn't look me in the eyes without crying, couldn't talk about what happened without his hands shaking uncontrollably. "I should have noticed," he repeated like a tormented mantra. "I should have stayed home more, should have paid more attention. I failed you, princess." My mother fell into deep depression, spending days in bed without eating or talking. When she finally began functioning again, it was as if she'd aged 20 years overnight. Her hair had turned completely white within months. How didn't I notice something like this happening under my own roof? She tortured herself. Our house became a mausoleum of painful memories. My brother's bedrooms were locked, their belongings stored in boxes in the attic. We never mentioned their names out loud again, as if they were a curse that might summon fresh horrors. At school, the situation became unbearable. Everyone knew what had happened. Some looked at me with pity that felt worse than contempt. Others with morbid curiosity, as if I were a circus attraction. Whispers followed me through corridors. "It's her, the girl who was abused by her own brothers. They say the father almost killed the sons when he found out." After 2 weeks of facing those looks and whispers, I begged my parents to change my school. But my father had a different, more radical idea. "Let's leave this place," he said one night during another silent, oppressive dinner. "There's nothing for us in this town except bad memories and pointing fingers." In August 1966, we left Riverdale behind forever. My father requested a transfer at his transport company, and we moved to New Hope, almost 250 miles away, a town where nobody knew us, where we wouldn't be the family of that terrible case. We left behind the house, the furniture, the photographs, almost everything that could remind us of the past. We started from scratch in a small apartment downtown near the Delaware River, trying to build new lives from the rubble of our destroyed family. But I learned painfully that no matter how far you run, trauma travels with you like an invisible companion. The nightmares continued, sometimes worse than before. Almost every night, I'd wake up screaming, cold sweating, feeling phantom hands that didn't exist touching me. My father would always run to my room, holding me until the shaking stopped, sometimes staying all night in a chair beside my bed. At my new Catholic school, St. Mary's Academy, I built impenetrable walls around myself. Nobody there knew my past, and I was determined to keep it that way. I became known as the weird one, the unfriendly one, the girl with no friends, and I preferred it that way. Friendship meant trust, and I had learned the most devastating lesson imaginable. Trust could destroy you. 6 months after moving, Robert's first letter arrived from the juvenile reformatory. My father wanted to burn it without opening it. I carried it for weeks before finally reading his apology and admission of guilt. He didn't make excuses, didn't blame Anthony and Joseph entirely, but acknowledged his choice to participate rather than protect me. I never responded to that letter, but I kept it as tangible acknowledgement that what happened was real, that I wasn't crazy, that the nightmare had truly occurred. Years passed slowly. The nightmares became less frequent, but never completely disappeared. I remained isolated, but gradually some classmates broke through my barriers with patience and genuine kindness. In 1971, when I was 19, I was accepted to the College of Education in Philadelphia. Despite my fears about leaving the protective bubble of New Hope and my parents' worried faces, I was determined not to let trauma prevent me from living the life I deserved. Philadelphia was overwhelming at first. Tall buildings, crowds of strangers, constant noise and movement. But it was also liberating in its anonymity. Nobody there knew my story. In my second year, I met John at a mutual friend's birthday party. He was an engineering student, calm, respectful, with kind eyes that never demanded more than I could give. When I flinched away during our first movie date, he simply said, "I'm sorry, I won't do anything you don't want." Those words were revolutionary to me. For the first time since my childhood ended violently in that kitchen, someone was recognizing my right to say no, to establish boundaries, to control my own body and choices. Our relationship progressed at my pace, achingly slow, but genuine. Each small victory was celebrated. Holding hands after months of friendship, the first kiss, the first time I talked about my family in vague terms. In 1974, when I learned Anthony and Joseph had been released early for good behavior, fear returned with crushing force. For days, I couldn't sleep, seeing dangers in every shadow, jumping at every unexpected sound. It was then I made the difficult decision to tell John everything. One night in his small apartment, I shared my entire story for the first time, from that first afternoon in the kitchen to my father's discovery, the trial, our escape to New Hope. I spoke without stopping, words pouring out like a flood that had been dammed up for 9 years. John listened in complete silence, holding my hands, silent tears streaming down his face. When I finished, emotionally and physically exhausted, he hugged me with such gentleness, I started crying again.
"You're the strongest person I've ever met," he said simply, "and I love you. Nothing you told me changes that. Nothing." That night marked the true beginning of my healing. Sharing my story, my darkest secret, and being accepted, loved not despite it, but perhaps even more because of what I'd survived, was liberating in ways I never imagined possible. With John's unwavering support, I wrote letters to all 3 brothers, not seeking reconciliation or offering complete forgiveness, but declaring my independence from the fear that had controlled me for so long. To Robert, I acknowledged his remorse while expressing that complete forgiveness was beyond me. "I wish you find peace and rebuild your life without ever causing pain to anyone again." To Joseph, I wrote about the years of anger I'd carried. I don't want contact, but I want you to know I won't live in fear of you anymore. To Anthony, the instigator and leader, I wrote the hardest letter. You stole my childhood, my innocence, my trust. For years, you controlled my life through fear. But that ends now. You have no more power over me. Sending those letters was a symbolic act, a declaration of independence. From that moment forward, I would no longer be defined as a victim of my brother's evil. I would be defined by my own choices, my own path, my own strength. In December 1974, I graduated with honors. John proposed 2 weeks later with a simple ring and a beautiful promise. I promise to take care of you, respect your boundaries, and build a life where you feel safe and loved. We married in March 1975 in New Hope. It was a sunny day scented with cherry blossoms, a new beginning in the town where we'd found refuge. My father walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes. You deserve all the happiness in the world, princess. Every day I thank God you survived and became this incredible woman. Our married life began in a small Philadelphia apartment. John worked at a construction company, while I got my first teaching job at an elementary school. Physical intimacy was challenging, as we'd expected. There were nights of tears, painful memories resurfacing, moments of panic. But John never pressured me, never showed frustration, loving me exactly as I could accept. In 1976, I discovered I was pregnant, a mixture of overwhelming joy and terror. Doctors had warned I might never conceive due to the severe internal damage. Part of me also feared not knowing how to be a mother when my own childhood had been so violently stolen. When Mary was born in January 1977, holding her for the first time was miraculous. She was so small, so perfect, so trusting of the world with no idea of the evil that could exist. I'll protect you always, I whispered, kissing her soft forehead. A promise I would keep with every fiber of my being. Being a mother healed me in unexpected, profound ways. Seeing Mary grow completely trusting in me showed I could be strong, protective, capable of unconditional love. When Peter was born in 1980, then Anna in 1983, our family was complete. My parents found renewed joy in their grandchildren. My father especially seemed to come back to life through them, playing games, telling stories, being the loving grandfather he was always meant to be. Through my children, my parents found redemption for what they hadn't been able to prevent years earlier. In 1985, Robert wrote again. His letter explained how my earlier words had changed his life trajectory. He'd finished his education, found stable work, met someone who knew his past and accepted him anyway. He volunteered at an institution helping child abuse victims, trying to create meaning from his terrible choices. I responded briefly this time, not resuming contact, but acknowledging his path to redemption. I'm glad you found a way forward. That's the most I can say right now. Years continued their steady march. I learned Anthony had died in a bar fight in 1990. Joseph had moved to the West Coast, disappearing from everyone's lives. Robert respected my boundaries, never trying to force reconnection. My father passed peacefully in 1992, knowing I was happy and safe. My mother followed 2 years later, dying in her sleep, as if she couldn't bear to remain in a world without him. John and I grew old together, watching our children graduate, marry, and give us grandchildren. The love between us, which began so hesitantly, grew into something deep and unshakable. In 2010, already a grandmother of 4, I made a decision I never imagined possible. I wrote to Robert asking to meet, not for him, but for myself, to definitively close that chapter of my life on my own terms. We met at a cafe in downtown Philadelphia. He was almost unrecognizable, gray hair, deep wrinkles, reading glasses, looking nothing like the teenager who'd participated in my torment. We talked for nearly 2 hours about our lives, our children, our separate paths, our regrets. He said, "I never stopped being sorry. Not a single day." "I know," I replied, surprised to feel no anger, just a distant, almost peaceful sadness. "And I hope you never do." It wasn't reconciliation. There were no hugs, no promises to keep in touch. It was closure, definitively turning the page and walking away from that chapter forever. As we parted, he asked one final question. "Were you able to be happy, Louise, despite everything?" I thought of John, of our children Mary, Peter, and Anna, of our 7 grandchildren, and the life we'd built together from ashes and pain. "Yes," I answered with complete honesty, "very happy." And that was my greatest victory, not allowing those months of horror to define my entire existence, but choosing life, love, and happiness despite the scars that would always remain. Today, at 73, I look back and see a difficult path, but one absolutely worth traveling. I'm a grandmother of 7 wonderful grandchildren, a retired teacher who helped shape hundreds of young lives, and a woman who learned that even the deepest wounds can heal if we give them time, care, and courage. The nightmares still come occasionally, even after all these decades. Some scars never completely fade, but they don't control me anymore. I control my story, my narrative, my life. If you're facing your own valley of shadows right now, struggling with trauma that seems insurmountable, please hear this. You are stronger than you imagine. The darkness feels permanent, but it isn't. Healing may be slow, painful, filled with setbacks, but it is possible. You deserve to be heard, believed, protected, and loved. What happened to you was not your fault. The shame belongs entirely to those who hurt you, never to you. Survival is victory. Each day you choose to keep going is an act of defiance against those who tried to break you. And beyond survival lies the possibility of actually thriving, of building a life filled with love, purpose, and joy. The darkness doesn't get the final word in your story. You do. From my heart to yours, from a grandmother who understands, there is always hope. Always. There is always a path beyond the pain, even when you can't see it yet. You are not alone. You are not broken beyond repair. You are a survivor, and that makes you remarkably, beautifully strong. With all my love and every ounce of courage I can send across the years, Grandma Lou.